Live. Chapter 5. This was a gentleman no longer young, of a stiff and portly appearance, and a courteous and sour countenance. Stories later. He began by stopping short in the doorway, staring about him with offensive and undisguised astonishment, as though asking himself what sort of place he had come to. Mistrustfully and with an affectation of being alarmed and almost affronted, he scanned Raskolnikov's low and narrow cabin. With the same amazement, he stared at Raskolnikov, who lay undressed, dishevelled, unwashed, on a miserable, dirty sofa, looking fixedly at him. Then, with the same deliberation, he scrutinized the uncouth, unkempt figure and unshaven face of Razumihin, who looked him boldly and inquiringly in the face without rising from his seat. A constrained silence lasted for a couple of minutes, and then, as might be expected, some scene shifting took place, reflecting probably from certain fairly unmistakable signs that he would get nothing in this cabin by attempting to overawe them. The gentleman softened somewhat and civilly, though some with some severity, emphasizing every syllable of his question, addressed Zosimo. Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, a student, or formerly a student. Zosimo made a slight movement and would have answered had no Razumin anticipated it. Razumin says, "Here he is lying on the sofa. What do you want?" This familiar "what do you want" seemed to cut the ground from the feet of the pompous gentleman. He was trying to turning to Razumin, but checked himself in time and turned to Zosimov again. Zosimov says, "This is Raskolnikov," nodding towards him. Then he gave a prolonged yawn, opening his mouth as wide as possible. Then he lazily put his hand into his waistcoat pocket, pulled out a huge gold watch in a round hunter's case, opened it, looked at it, and as slowly and lazily proceeded to put it back. Raskolnikov himself lay without speaking on his back, gazing persistently, though without understanding, at the stranger. Now that his face was turned away from the strange flower on the paper, it was extremely pale and bore a look of anguish, as though he had just undergone an agonizing operation or just been taken from the rack. But the newcomer gradually began to arouse his attention. Then his wonder, then suspicion, and even alarm. When Zosimo said, "This is Raskolnikov," he jumped up quickly, sat on the sofa, and with an almost defiant but weak and breaking voice articulated, "Yes, I am Raskolnikov. What do you want?" The visitor scrutinized him and pronounced impressively. Luzin says, "Fyodor Petrovich Luzin. I believe I have reason to hope that my name is not wholly unknown to you." But Raskolnikov, who had expected something quite different, gazed blankly and dreamily at him, making no reply at all, as though he heard the name of Pyotr Petrovich for the first time. Luzin says, "Is it impossible? Is it possible that you can, up to the present, have received no information?" asked Pyotr Petrovich, somewhat disconcerted. In reply, Raskolnikov sank languidly back on the pillow, put his hands behind his head, and gazed at the ceiling. A look of dismay come into Luzin's face. Zosimo and Razumihin stared at him more inquisitively than ever, and at last he showed unmistakable Signs of embarrassment. I have presumed and calculated, plus Lucien Frater. Yet a letter posted more than 10 days, if not a fortnight ago. Resume him. I say, why are you standing in the doorway? Resume him interrupted him suddenly. If you have something to say, sit down. Natasha and you are so crowded. Natasha, make room. Here's your chair. Shut your way. He moved his chair back from the table, made a little space between the table and his knees, and waited in a rather cramped position for the visitor to thread his way in. The minute was so chosen that it was impossible to refuse, and the visitor squeezed his way through, hurrying and stumbling. Reaching the chair, he sat down, looking suspiciously at Razumhin. No need to be nervous, Razumhin blurted out. Rhodia has been ill for the last 5 days and delirious for three, but now he's recovering and has got an appetite. This is his doctor who has just had a look at him. I am a comrade of Rhodia's, like him, formerly a student, and now I'm nursing him. So don't you take any notice of us, but go on with your business. Thank you, but shall I not disturb the invalid by my presence and conversation? Pyotr Petrovich asked of Zosimo. No, mumbled Zosimo. You may amuse him. He yawned again, resuming him. He has been conscious a long time since the morning. Went on resuming, whose familiarity seemed so much like unaffected good nature that Pyotr Petrovich began to be more cheerful, partly perhaps because this shabby and impotent person had introduced himself as a student. Lucien says, You mama, resuming, and he cleared his throat loudly. Lucien looked at him inquiringly. That's all right. Go on. Lucien shrugged his shoulders. Lucien, your mama had commenced a letter to you while I was sojourning in her neighborhood. On my arrival here, I purposely allowed a few days to elapse before coming to see you, in order that I might be fully assured that you were in full possession of the tidings. But now, to my astonishment, I know, Raskolnikov cried suddenly with impatient vexation. So you are the fiancé. I know, and that's enough. There was no doubt about Pyotr Petrovich being offended this time, but he said nothing. He made a violent effort to understand what it all meant. There was a moment's silence. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov, who had turned a little towards him when he answered, began suddenly staring at him again with a marked curiosity, as though he had not had a good look at him yet, or as though something new had struck him. He rose from his pillow on purpose to stare at him. There certainly was something peculiar in Pyotr Petrovich's whole appearance, something which seemed to justify the title of fiancé so unceremoniously applied to him. In the first place, it was evident, far too much so indeed, that Pyotr Petrovich had made eager use of his few days in the capital to get himself up and rig himself out in expectation of his betrothed, a perfectly innocent and permissible proceeding indeed. Even his own, perhaps too complacent, consciousness of the agreeable improvement in his appearance might have been forgiven in such circumstances. Seeing that Pyotr Petrovich has taken up the role of fiancé, all his clothes were fresh from the tailor's and were all right, except for being too new and too distinctly appropriate. Even the stylish new round had the same significance. Pyotr Petrovich treated it too respectfully and held it too carefully in his hands. The exquisite pair of lavender gloves, real Louvain, told the same tale if only from the fact of his not wearing them, but carrying them in his hand for show. Light and youthful colors predominated in Pyotr Petrovich's attire. He wore a charming summer jacket of a fall shade, light thin trousers, a waistcoat of the same, new and fine linen, a cravat of the lightest cambric and pink stripes on it. And the best of it was, this all suited Petro Pyrovich. His very fresh and even handsome face looked younger than his 45 years at all times. His dark, mutton chop whiskers made an agreeable setting on both sides, growing thickly upon his shining, clean shaven chin. Even his hair, touched here and there with gray, though it had been combed and curled at the hairdressers, did not give him a stupid appearance as curly hair usually does, by inevitably suggesting a German on his wedding day. If there really was something unpleasing and repulsive in his rather good looking and imposing countenance, it was due to a quite other causes. After scanning Mr. Luzin unceremoniously, Raskolnikov smiled malignantly, sank back on the pillow, and stared at the ceiling as before. But Mr. Luzin hardened his heart and seemed to determine to take no notice of their oddities. Luzin says, I feel the greatest regret at finding you in this situation. He began, again breaking the silence with an effort. If I had been aware of your illness, I should have come earlier. But you know what business is? I have too a very important legal affair in the Senate, not to mention other preoccupations which you may well conjecture. I am expecting your mamma and sister any minute. Raskolnikov made a movement and seemed about to speak. His face showed some excitement. Pyotr Petrovich paused, waited, but as nothing followed, he went on. Luzin says, any minute, I have found a lodging for them on their arrival. Raskolnikov, where? Luzin, very near here, in Bakhailev's house. Razumil, that's in Voskresenskiy. Put, there are two stories of rooms led by a merchant called Yushin. I've been there. Luzin, yes, rooms. Razumil, a disgusting place, filthy, stinking, and what's more, of a doubtful character. Things have happened here, there, and there all of all sorts of fair people living there. And I went there about a scandalous business. It's cheap though. I could not, of course, find out so much about it, for I am a stranger in Petersburg myself. Pyotr Petrovich replied huffily. However, the two rooms are exceedingly clean, and as it is for so short a time, I have already taken a permanent, that is our future flat, he said, addressing Raskolnikov, and I am having it done up. And meanwhile, I am myself compared for a room in a lodging with my friend Andrei Semyonovich Labaziatnikov in the flat of Madame Lipavashel. It was he who told me of Bakalev's house, too. Raskolnikov said, Labaziatnikov, as if recalling something. Luzin, yes, Andrei Semyonovich Labaziatnikov, a clerk in the ministry. Do you know him? Raskolnikov, yes, no. Luzin, excuse me, I fancied so from your inquiry. I was once his guardian, a very nice young man and advanced. I like to meet young people. One learns new things from them. Lucian looked around hopefully at them all. Resume him. How do you mean? Lucian, in the most serious and essential matters, Pyotr Petrovich replies, as though delighted at the question. You see, it's 10 years since I visited Petersburg. All the novelties, reforms, ideas have reached us in the provinces. But to see it all more clearly, one must be in Petersburg. And it's my notion that you observe and learn most by watching the younger generation. And I confess, I am delighted. At what? Said Razum. Losing. Your question is a wide one. I may be mistaken, but I fancy I find clearer views, more, so to say, criticism, criticism, more practically. So, that's true. Resuming, nonsense. There is no practicality. Practicality is a difficult thing to find. It does not drop down from heaven. And for the last 200 years, we have been divorced from all practical life. Ideas, if you like, are fermenting, he said to Pyotr Petrovich. And desire for good exists, though it's in a childish form. And honestly, you may find, although there are crowds of brigands, anyway, there is no practicality. Practicality goes well sharp. Listen, I don't agree with you, Pyotr Petrovich replied with evident enjoyment. Of course, people do get carried away and make mistakes, but one must have indulgence. Those mistakes are merely evidence of enthusiasm for the cause and of abnormal external environment. Okay, 20 seconds right here. If little has been done, the time has been but short. Of means I'll not speak. It's my personal view. If you care to know that something has been accomplished already, new valuable ideas, new valuable works are circulating in the place of our old dreamy and romantic authors. Literature is taking a maturer form. Many injurious prejudices have been rooted out and turned into ridicule in a world we have cut ourselves off irrevocably from the past. And that, through my thinking, is a great thing. Raskolnikov is learned by heart to show off. Losing. What? Zosimo. That's all true. Losing. Isn't it so? You must admit, he went on, addressing Razumin with a shade of triumph and superciliousness. He almost added, young man, that there is an advance or, as they say now, progress in the name of science and economic truth. A commonplace. Losing. No, not a commonplace. Hitherto, for instance, if I were told, love the neighbor, what came of it? He went on, perhaps with excessive haste. It came to my tearing my coat if half to share with my neighbor, and we both were left half naked. As a Russian proverb has it, catch several hares and you won't catch one. Science now tells us love yourself before all men, for everything in the world rests on self interest. You love yourself and manage your own affairs properly, and your code remains whole. Economic truth adds that the better private affairs are organized in society, the more our codes, so to say, the firmer are its foundations, and the better is the common welfare organized too. Therefore, in acquiring wealth solely exclusively for myself. I am acquiring, so to speak, for all and helping to bring to pass my neighbors getting a little more than a torn coat. And that not from private, personal liberality, but as a consequence of the general advance. The idea is simple, but unhappily it has been a long time reaching us, being hindered by idealism and sentimentality. And yet, it would seem to want very little weight to perceive it. Resuming, excuse me, I have very little with myself, and so let us drop it. I began this discussion with an object, but I've grown so sick during the last 3 days of this chatting to amuse oneself of this incessant flow of commonplaces, always the same, that by Jove, I blush even when other people talk like that. You are in a hurry, no doubt, to exhibit your acquirements, and I don't blame you. That's quite pardonable. I only wanted to find out what sort of man you are. For so many unscrupulous people have got hold of the progressive cause of late and have so distorted in their own interest everything they touch that the whole cause has been dragged in the mire. That's enough. Losing, excuse me, sir. Do you mean to suggest so unceremoniously that I too resuming? Oh, my dear sir, how could I? Come, that's enough. Resuming concluded, and he turned abruptly to Zosimo to continue their previous conversation. Luzin had the good sense to accept the disavowal. He made up his mind to take leave in another minute or two. Luzin, I trust your acquaintance, he said, addressing Raskolnikov. May upon your risk recovery, may upon your recovery and in view of the circumstances of which you are aware, become closer. Above all, I hope for a return to health. Raskolnikov did not even turn his head. Luzin began getting up from his chair. Zosimo, one of our customers must have killed her, Zosimo declared positively. Resume, not a doubt of it. Porphyry doesn't give his opinion, but is examining all who have left pledges with her there. Raskolnikov, examining them? He asked aloud. Resume, yes. What then? What then? Raskolnikov, nothing. Zosimo, how does he get hold of them? Resume, coach has given the name of some of them. Other names are on the wrappers of the pledges, and some have come forward of themselves. Zosimo, it must have been a cunning and practiced ruffian. The boldness of it, the coolness. Resume, that's just what it wasn't. That's what throws you all off the scent. But I maintain that he is not cunning, not practiced, and probably this was his first crime. The supposition that it was a calculated crime and a cunning criminal doesn't work. Suppose him to have been inexperienced, and it's clear that it was only a chance that saved him. And chance may do anything. Why he did not foresee obstacles, perhaps. And how did he set to work? He took jewels worth 10 or 20 rubles, stuffing his pockets with them, ransacked the old woman's trunks, her rags, and they found 1,500 rubles, beside notes in a box in the top drawer of the chest. He did not know how to rob. He could only murder. It was his first crime, I assure you. His first crime. He lost his head, and he got off more by luck than by good counsel. Losing, you are talking of the murder of old pawnbroker, I believe. Addressing Zosimo, Luzin said. He was standing, hat and gloves in hand, but before departing, he felt disposed to throw off a few more intellectual phrases. He was evidently anxious to make a favorable impression, and his vanity overcame his prudence. Zosimo, yes, you have heard of it. Losing, oh yes, being in the neighborhood. Zosim, do you know the details? I can say that, but another circumstance interests me in this case. The whole question, so to say, not to speak of the fact that crime has been greatly on the increase among the lower classes during the last 5 years, not to speak of the cases of robbery or arson anywhere. What struck me as the stranger thing is that in the higher classes too, crime is increasing proportionately. In one place, one hears of students robbing the mail on the high road. In another place, people of good social position forge false banknotes. In Moscow, of late, a whole gang has been captured who used to forge lottery tickets, and one of the ringleaders was a lecturer in universal history. Then our secretary abroad was murdered from some obscure motive of gain. And if this old woman, the pawnbroker, has been murdered by someone of a higher class in society for peace and don't pawn gold trinkets, how are we to explain this demoralization of the civilized part of our society? Zosimo, there are many economic changes, he put it. Resuming, how are we to explain it? Razumihin called him up. It might be explained by our illiterate impracticality. Listen, how do you mean? Razumihin, what answer had your lecturer in Moscow to make to the question why he was forging notes? Everybody is getting rich one way or another, so I want to make haste to get rich too. I don't remember the exact words, but the upshot was that he wants money for nothing without waiting or working. We have grown used to having everything ready made, to walking on crutches, to having our food chewed for us. Then the great hour struck and Ariman showed himself in his true colors. Losing but morality and, so to speak, principles. Raskolnikov, why do you worry about it? He interposed suddenly. It's in accordance with our theory, with your theory. Listen, in accordance with my theory, Raskolnikov, why carry out logically the theory you were advocating just now? And it follows that people may be killed. Losing, upon my word. Zosimo, no, that's not so. Raskolnikov lay with a white face and twitching upper lip, breathing painfully. There is a measure in all things, Luzin went on superciliously. Economic ideas are not an incitement to murder. One has but to suppose. Raskolnikov, and is it true? Again, he interposed once more suddenly, in a voice quivering with fury and delight in insulting him. Is it true that you told your fiancée within an hour of her acceptance that what pleased you most was that she was a beggar, because it was better to raise a wife from poverty, so that you may have complete control over her and reproach her with your being her benefactor? Losing, upon my word, he cried wrathfully and irritably, crimson with confusion. To distort my words in this way, excuse me, allow me to assure you that the report which has reached you, or rather, let me say, has been conveyed to you, has no foundation in truth, and I suspect who, in a word, this arrow, in a word, your mamma. She seemed to me in other things, with all her excellent qualities of somewhat high-flown and romantic way of thinking. But I was 1,000 miles from supposing that she would misunderstand and misrepresent things is so fanciful a way, and indeed, Raskolnikov, I tell you what, raising himself on his pillow and fixing his piercing, glittering eyes upon him, I tell you what, losing what? He stood too, still, waiting with a defiant, offended face. Silence lasted for some seconds. Raskolnikov, why, if ever again you dare to mention a single word about my mother, I shall spend you flying downstairs. Resuming, what's the matter with you? Losing. So that's how it is. Losing turned pale and bit his lip. Let me tell you, sir. He began deliberately, doing his utmost to restrain himself, but breathing hard. At the first moment I saw you, you were ill disposed to me. But I remained here on purpose to find out more. I could forgive a great deal in a sick man and a connection, but you, never after this. Raskolnikov, I'm not ill. Losing, so much the worse. Raskolnikov, go to hell. But Luzin was already leaving without finishing his speech, squeezing between the table and the chair. Razumihin got up this time and let him pass. Without glancing at anyone, and not anyone noting to Zosimo, who had for some time been making signs to him to let the sick man alone. He went out, lifting his hat to the level of his shoulders to avoid crushing it as he stopped to go out of the door. And even the curve of his spine was expressive of the horrible insult he had received. Resuming, how could you? How could you? Raskolnikov, let me alone. Let me alone, all of you. He cried in a frenzy. Will you ever leave off tormenting me? I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anyone. Anyone now. Get away from me. I want to be alone. 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 Zosum, come along, said Zosum, nodding to Razumi. But we can't leave him like this. Come along, he repeated insistently, and he went out. Razumin thought a minute and ran to overtake him. It might be worse not to obey him, said Zosimo on the stairs. He mustn't be irritated. Razumin, what's the matter with him? Zosimo, if only he could get some favorable shock, that's what would do it. At first he was better. You know, he has got something on his mind, some fixed idea weighing on him. I am very much afraid so. He must have. Resume him. Perhaps it's that gentleman, losing. From his conversation, I get that he is going to marry sister, and that he had received a letter about it just before his illness. Yes, confound the man. He may have upset the case altogether. But have you noticed he takes no interest in anything. He does not respond to anything except one point on which he seems excited. That's the murder. Yes, resuming agreed. I noticed that too. He's interested, frightened. It gave him a shock on the day he was ill in the police office. He fainted. Tell me more about that is this evening, and I'll tell you something afterwards. He interests me very much. In half an hour, I'll go and see him again. There will be no inflammation, though. Thanks, and I'll wait with Pashenka. Meantime, and will keep watch on him through Nastasia. Raskolnikov, left alone, looked with impatience and misery at Nastasia, but she still lingered. Won't you have some tea now? She asked. Raskolnikov, later, I'm sleepy. Leave me. He turned abruptly to the wall. Nastasia went out. Finish. Chapter 5 finish. And